I was a former director and an advocate in Dr. Joan Ifland's group, Addiction Reset Community. And when I brought some concerns up, they were ignored. And so then when I took them to the rest of the advocates, because I was concerned about going beyond their scope of practice, I was kicked out of the community. So now Joan is taking my email that I had sent and she breaks down my email. I'm going to show that recording. So let's get started.
Hi, everybody. Joan Ifland here. This is, what is today? Thursday, August 28th, maybe. This is the managers and advocates meetings, and I'm certainly glad to see you all here. So I do think that Amy's email has had a devastating impact on the ARC. So what I've done today is I've made some slides. So I'm going to show you guys those slides, and then I'm going to go through the email line by line and show you what was said in the email versus the federal guidelines and the research.
She's also going to cherry pick what is said in the federal guidelines.
A lot of the accusations in the email came around what is peer support and what is the role of peer support in emotional processing. So what are we doing here today is we are looking at the evidence for what the ARC is doing, particularly with parts work, and the role of peer support in processing trauma. Why are we doing this? Why am I here just spending hours upon hours upon hours to help the advocates understand their role in processing quote unquote deep trauma and deep emotion?
So Joan is spending hours and hours and hours trying to get the advocates to understand their role as she interprets it. And it's taking hours and hours and hours because she is having to twist things in order to fit her narrative.
Emotions. And we do have, I think you could call it a mandate, but we have a description of our responsibilities as peer support in the federal guidelines.
Just to be clear, the ARC does not have a mandate. She has not been mandated by any federal agency to do parts work.
So let's look at what we are being charged with by the agency is called the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Agency. It is an agency of the Department of Health and Social Services. The Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Agency, I'm going to call it SAMHSA, the SAMHSA federal guideline.
I'm also going to refer to it as SAMHSA just to keep things consistent throughout this video.
Tell us explicitly what our job is. They have issued 3 guidelines, 2014, 2022, and 2023, describing peer support. Now, in the first one, 2014, the name of the guideline is called Trauma-Informed Approaches and Programs. If you're going to call yourself a trauma-informed operation, and you should, everybody who's in mental health should be trauma informed, then one of the key principles that you have to follow is that peer support is included in the promotion of trauma informed care.
And that is correct. SAMHSA does make clear that peer support is part of trauma-informed care. Now, I just want to point out that that is trauma-informed care, and I want to highlight that. But Joan crosses the line between trauma-informed care and into trauma processing or trauma-specific care, which that is like that is for licensed clinicians, licensed professionals to do. Peer support is trauma-informed care, meaning that we walk along the side of you as you are going through trauma processing with a licensed professional.
Number 2 on the list of 6. And then the next guidelines that they issued in 2022 peer support services and crisis care, and basically says peers should be right there. Peers should be involved in crisis care. So crisis care, to me, that's trauma care. Okay.
Equating crisis care with trauma care is Joan's interpretation, not SAMHSA's wording, not SAMHSA's guidelines.
And then the third set of guidelines were the certifications. There are 12 categories of competencies for peer support workers, and we cover them all. FARA does an incredibly good job of meeting all 12 competencies.
So FARA is Joan's advocate training. It stands for Food Addiction Recovery Advocate, and it's her training in her community. And the 12 competencies that she's referring to in the SAMHSA guidelines that she says that they meet for the FARA training, no outside agency has ever said, yes, you meet all 12 competencies. This is just Joan's interpretation of her own training. But that's yet to be determined if that is true.
So this is super clear. You can't miss it. You can't misinterpret it. Peer support processes deep emotions and trauma. It is expected of us.
Peer support does not process deep emotions and trauma. Again, trauma-informed care is not trauma processing care. Trauma processing is reserved for licensed clinicians.
It's in the guidelines.
Wrong.
The research says we're doing it. So here we go. Emotional and trauma-related processes are explicitly described in the research literature as the mission of peer support. Peer supporters are shown to spend approximately half of their time in emotional support. And now here is a key point. The literature does not refer to a line. There's no division between regular emotions and deep emotions. There's no division between regular trauma and deep trauma. It does not exist in the guidelines or the research literature. So if you hear somebody talking about deep trauma or deep emotions, they're not using a concept that is accepted in research or federal guidelines. So here are.
So if you hear someone use, according to Joan, if you hear someone use the term deep emotions or deep trauma, they are not using a concept recognized by federal guidelines. However, the ARC does refer to deep, uses terms such as deep emotions and deep trauma. So I guess Joan's community is not using a concept recognized by federal guidelines.
Are the claims that were made in that email. These are direct quotes. That's why they're in italics. We are being trained to guide members through deep emotional and trauma-related processes that are typically reserved for licensed therapists. I just looked at this extensive evidence that peer support is required, it's essential, it's integral for processing trauma.
Oh, wrong. Big time out there. Nowhere is peer support supposed to be processing trauma. Peer support is a support system. Peer support does not do trauma processing.
And here's this is wild. To me, this is just wild. I read this after reading all the guidelines and reading all the research, not all of it, familiarizing myself with it. And I think here's somebody saying that this emotional processing is reserved for licensed therapists. I don't even know what to say, except it's not true. And then here we go. Facilitating trauma processing, unburdening, or transforming wounded parts is considered psychotherapy, which is not true, and should only be done by qualified.
Time out. Yes, actually, any facilitation of trauma processing using IFS interventions such as parts work is by definition psychotherapy and should only be done by a licensed clinician or a licensed professional.
Clinicians, we've just read that it's essential to have peer support in these processes?
It is essential to have peer support, but again, peer support, peers do not take you or guide you through trauma processing. That is beyond scope of practice.
And here's a statement from that email that it should only be done by qualified clinicians. I don't know. I
True.
feel a sense of outrage. So there were a lot of accusations about.
I think she feels a sense of outrage because she now has to try to wiggle around all of this because she, I don't know if she has a problem, has an issue with saying, you know what, I went over the line, I went a little bit too far, I'm going to step it back and we're not going to do this because that would hurt her ego. And if what she was doing was ethically okay, there would be no pushback. But I think she's outraged because you're having to work extra hard to twist and manipulate your advocates.
There were a lot of accusations about parts work. So how does parts fit in? The parts work process helps members perceive limiting beliefs. It helps members perceive a limiting belief, and thus parts work fulfills the SAMHSA definition of emotional responsibilities of peer support. This is our responsibility to bolster self-esteem and confidence.
SAMHSA does include emotional support as part of peer competencies. Things like showing empathy, validating someone's worth, and instilling hope. But SAMHSA, let's be very clear, does not define emotional support as guiding people through trauma processing interventions like parts work. That is Joan's interpretation, not in the SAMHSA's guidelines or in their language.
Is a questionnaire. The way we have distilled this and adapted it to the ARC.
Okay, here Joan is showing how she has framed parts work into a harmless questionnaire while simultaneously introducing practices that blur the lines of psychotherapy.
All we took was what we adapted into a questionnaire. Okay, so questionnaires have been used in emotional processing in social and support circles for about 100 years. Now, in the ARC, another example, we've used this, I'm going to guess, for about three years. Byron Katie's The Work. It's a set of 4 questions. Other ones that I was able to discover, David Hawkins' Map of Consciousness, Dale Dwoskin's The Sedona Method, Holly Suley's 50 Questions. So questionnaires are used in emotional processing a lot.
So yes, that is correct. Questionnaires are used in emotional processing a lot. Questionnaires can be used by an individual for self-therapy, but once they are used with someone to guide you through that questionnaire, you are no longer doing self-therapy. The member is no longer doing self-therapy, but rather doing guided therapy. And that actually blurs the lines into psychotherapy.
If you look at the ARC exercises, you think, okay, I'm kind of upset or confused at the beginning of an exercise, and by the end of the exercise, I'm calm and clear. Well, you have processed emotions in that exercise, and many of those exercises are a series of questions.
So again, using a questionnaire for self-guided therapy, absolutely perfect. That's the way to do it. Again, when we have an advocate come in and start guiding you through those questions, now we are blurring the lines of psychotherapy. Now the addiction reset community is blurring the lines of psychotherapy into psychotherapy. Joan is blurring the lines into psychotherapy. Regulatory bodies such as state boards and SAMHSA would most likely consider this counseling and psychotherapy, especially if it's a paid service. Being a paid service actually changes the dynamics of the relationship. Um, and so I've just recently started looking into it. It's not something I know a whole lot about and how that does, but My guess is that once it's a paid service, such as the ARC membership is, now that then the member is paying, the advocate is guiding them through these questionnaires, and because it's paid, it elevates the advocate as being an expert, um, and therefore it's no longer just a peer support group. So again, I don't really know all the details, how this all would affect what advocates are doing in the ARC, since they are being paid and the members are paying to be part of the group. So something to look into.
Questionnaire. Now, here are the claims. ARC is using processes that, in my view, go far beyond the boundaries of ethical peer support. Parts work may be crossing important ethical and safety boundaries. It just doesn't have any basis in reality. It doesn't.
I just have to chuckle at that. It has no basis in reality. It is completely and totally reality. Um, maybe not in Joan's reality, which then I guess we need to question maybe her mental status.
Have any basis in how questionnaires are used in support circles.
I think I just went over how questionnaires are used. And saying that my concerns have no basis in reality, she's just trying to dismiss it altogether. And I would expect better from someone of Joan's caliber to be able to make a more thoughtful, educated response to my email other than it's just not based in reality.
Now we have a bunch of issues about licensing. So here are the guidelines. SAMHSA does not show a licensing requirement in its requirements for peer support competencies. To the contrary, the role of peer support is defined as distinctly separate from the role of licensed professionals. This is just clear as a bell. You have licensed professionals over here, you have peer support over here. They are separate. They have separate roles. Each one is essential, but they don't really cross boundaries.
Here, Joan is twisting or implying that because SAMHSA doesn't require a license, peers can do anything within emotional support, including trauma processing. This is not so. In reality, SAMHSA makes a distinction. Peers do not need licenses because their role is not psychotherapy. It's when you cross that line into psychotherapy that you now require a license, which is my contention that Joan's parts work is does. By saying that they don't cross boundaries, the peer support and then licensed professionals, by saying that they don't cross boundaries, she's totally eradicating what scope of practice is. She's just kind of just thrown it out the window. There is no scope of practice. In fact, the problem arises when peers start acting like clinicians. That is where we're running into a problem. That is a boundary crossing. So now you are crossing the line. There is a distinct boundary in scope of practice, what peers can support can do and what a licensed clinician can do. And Joan is just wiping it all away as if there is no scope of practice boundary.
Licensed professionals do not have the time and skills to build recovery relationships with clients. In a once a week appointment with a licensed professional, you do not have time to build that relationship, but a peer does. And that is our job, to build.
Okay, so the truth is, peers are not licensed because their job is relationship building, mentoring, and supporting, not delivering, developing, doing psychotherapy. Parts work is not just relationship building, it's guided trauma processing. Trauma processing requires professional training and licensing. In my opinion, parts work is clearly outside scope of practice, peer support scope of practice. Say that 5 times.
And building relationships does not require a license. Relationship development is the job of peer support. Supervision is another here. In Washington State, where FAR is registered, FAR is the parent company, peer support workers are considered to be independent providers and do not require supervision. Here's the claims from the email. Dr. Ifland does not have a needed license. You see the regulations, no license is required. And then you see the claim in the email, I don't have a required license. There's no required license. This is fantasy.
What Joan is saying here about Washington State not requiring supervision is misleading. So if you're staying in your boundaries of peer support, then you don't require supervision. It's when you go beyond that that now requires supervision. Also, I'd like to note here that the laws and regulations in the state of Washington only apply to advocates who live in the state of Washington. Since advocates are independent contractors, you need to look into the laws in the state or country in which you live in and work within those boundaries, whatever that scope of practice is for you. You can't go by what Joan says is Washington laws unless you live in Washington State.
Maybe Gravely doesn't have a license, and I will show you. It's so long. Her licensing descriptions, or not licensing, but her legal status is so extensive that I have to put it in a separate document.
As you notice, Joan did kind of mess up there a little bit and say that Sheila had a license and then she had to quickly walk it back. She does that a lot. And this, I think, is she does this on purpose. And in my opinion, let me just be clear, my opinion, Joan does this on purpose because she wants to put that idea in your head that Sheila has a license when she doesn't. But now it's already put in your head that she has a license. So let me just say here, Sheila does not have a license. Neither does Joan. Neither one have a license. If ARC advocates are guiding trauma processing or psychotherapy like intervention, those roles do require a license, which neither Joan or Sheila have, which Joan has just said that she does not have a license. Neither does Sheila. And neither one has ever held a license in therapy, a therapy license. Joan hasn't, and neither has Sheila, has never had a license to do therapy.
This is obviously, it's at least in the state of Washington where we're registered, a license is needed for supervision. Now that I'm showing this to you advocates, my heart is breaking. My heart is breaking. Our members need this so desperately. And this email scared off a lot of advocates from getting this, from being empowered with this parts process.
ARC members do need safe and reliable support. That's why it's so important for the ARC and for Joan to draw clear boundaries. Trauma-informed care isn't about asking unlicensed peers to process trauma. Yeah, I want you to hear that again. Trauma-informed care is not about asking unlicensed peers to process trauma. It's about protecting members from harm. When Joan blurs peer support with psychotherapy, she puts members and advocates at risk. That doesn't empower the advocates or the members. It empowers Joan. I want you to hear me. It empowers Joan.
I think that's it for the slide. This is analysis I did on the claims, just line by line by line by line. I wanted to make sure that I understood everything that was being asserted. Okay. So we know that not only did this email contain these just bizarre assertions, but it was sent with a stolen email list, and that's theft.
Okay. I want to address this again, once and for all. Well, probably not once and for probably not for all. The email list was not stolen. It was given to me by Joan, which I have evidence of, and I will prove that in a court. In court, should we go to court? So, which she, is threatening to do. She's threatening to take me to court, and so I will prove that in court that the email list was given to me. In addition, I sent the email out while I was still a member of the Addiction Reset community. She's tried to imply that I used this after being let go. Not the case. I was part of the community when I voiced my concerns, when I when I sent the email to advocates. Um, so yeah, I did not use a stolen email list.
It's just plain old stealing or something. And I would be remiss as the CEO and protector of our assets to let somebody just steal our stuff. No, I can't do that. So this is what
Absolutely, Joan. I totally agree with you. Just have a question for you, Joan. Has anybody signed an NDA yet? I think I brought that up in a previous video. Has that happened yet?
we work from here in the ARC, and this is what the email asserts. So you right off the bat, you see a problem. This email is headed by a marketing banner. This is a marketing email. And
Okay, so I just want to show you the marketing banner that she is referring to. This is what she is referring to, that I am marketing to people. And I just want to say that the banner is the same one I've used for years in the ARC. I've been using it for years. She didn't have a problem with it then. All of a sudden, it's a problem. It's an issue. So it is expected that advocates reach out to their members through their own personal email, not through a company email. So it is expected and somewhat even required that if you need to send an email to your members, you need to do it with using your own email, personal email. So advocates who have who maybe have had a coaching business before or have their own communities, whatever the case may be, have a banner of who they are on their email. This was in no way me trying to market to advocates I didn't send it to any members. So I'm not trying to get any members from this because I don't even have a community a paid community. I have a small community that is to support other advocates, other members who have left the ARC, who have felt wronged by the ARC. That's really what my community is. People who have felt wronged by the ARC and just want that support, want a little, yeah, peer support, what we're kind of talking about here. It's just another area of peer support. And another person, prominent person in the ARC, who is a director in the ARC, has her own community, has her own programs. That is Sheila. I guarantee her emails have a banner, a marketing banner on across her emails. So is it, which is it, Joan? I mean, you can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. So decide. Do the advocates use their own emails and then you risk having their own marketing banner or not? You decide. And then stick to it. Whatever your decision is. It's really up to you on this. But don't come at me about having a banner on my email that all of a sudden it's marketing when I've been using this banner for years in the ARC. Now back to our video.
the email asserts that the material is in my view. We don't work from personal opinion. We work from research. So this is a fantasy email. This is just coming out of this person's head.
Okay, this is not a fantasy email. To point out that parts work looks like therapy, looks like psychotherapy is not fantasy. It's actually it's common sense. It's common sense to bring up a concern. It's good to bring up a concern. So what I'm saying is very consistent with the SAMHSA guidelines. Saying in my view, I'm saying that I have an opinion that this is my perspective on what is happening in the ark. It's in my view. And to throw it away to say, oh, well, we don't work in the someone's views, we work from research is it's dismissive. And if advocates raising ethical concerns are told that their views are groundless because it's their view that it's groundless, well, that's poor leadership. That's yeah. I don't know how else to say that. And it's very disappointing. It's
Ignored her when she came to tell me about her concerns. And that is not true. I showed her the evidence and she chose to ignore it and instead continue to entertain what we now see clearly are groundless fears. She's claiming that the advocates are being asked to do parts, advocates are being offered parts training.
okay, semantics. Now we have semantics here. Okay, in high control environments, optional often means expected. Same. This is a high control environment. Um, in my opinion, the only reason why the arc is not a cult is because Joan just doesn't have the capabilities of doing that. Sorry, I guess that's a kind of a cut down a little bit on Joan's abilities because I guarantee it, if she could make this a cult, she would. In high control environments, optional often means expected. Offering training implies that if you want to do this, you can. However, the goal for Joan is for advocates to do parts work with members. And if you choose not to, if you opt out, you risk being left behind, not advancing, not getting members. So is it really optional then?
She claims that the parts work goes far beyond, far, not just beyond, but goes far beyond the boundaries of ethical peer support. Parts work may be crossing important ethical and safety boundaries. And then I go into the evidence that parts is a questionnaire. Here we go. Here are the federal guidelines. There's no mention of any ethical limits on the depth of trauma helped by peer support. That's just, there's no distinction between support or trauma and deep trauma.
Okay, SAMHSA guidelines don't use the phrase deep trauma, true, but they do distinguish between trauma-informed care and trauma-specific treatment or trauma processing. That is an ethical boundary, and Joan just ignores it.
ARC's competencies closely meet SAMHSA's guidelines for safety. The research shows that peer support is used in cases of severe trauma, including PTSD, severe injury, sexual abuse in childhood, domestic violence, depression, anxiety, even schizophrenia. So
This is misleading. Yes, peers do help support people with those conditions, but they do not provide therapy or trauma processing for those conditions.
So for this claim that we are going beyond the boundaries of ethical peer support, there's peer support is used everywhere. This, of course, is what is breaking my heart. As I have shown this to a
It also breaks my heart, Joan, to see advocates asked to step into therapy-like roles without clear boundaries.
as ARC members have been educated about the extensive evidence for the essential role of peer support in helping all levels of trauma and mental health. The others mentioned in the email have been able to see that her concerns are based on false premises.
My concerns are not based on false premises. My concern is based on SAMHSA's own distinction Trauma-informed support is not the same as trauma-specific treatment or trauma processing. That's not a false premise, that's a federal guideline.
She has spread false alarms, and she's noted that other members of the community are buying into her groundless fears.
If multiple advocates feel uneasy, those aren't groundless fears. That's a signal that the community deserves clarity and perhaps is heading in the wrong direction. Dismissing their concerns doesn't remove them, it just silences them. And also, I want to point out that they advocates who want to stay in the community, such as myself, I wanted to be a part of the community. But if you bring up a concern such as this, um, you risk being kicked out of the community. So it's going to silence them rather than having an open discussion. A real, true open discussion. No one's gonna go against what Joan is saying. They're not going to voice a differing opinion unless they are ready to leave the addiction reset community.
And this is evidence of the harm that she has caused the ARC.
So Joan is shifting the blame to me as being the person who has caused harm to the ARC, when actually I would put it back on her.
And this is what hurts my heart. Here's the evidence. SAMHSA does not show a licensing requirement in its requirements for peer support competencies. To the contrary, the role of peer support is defined as distinctly separate from the role of licensed professionals. Licensed professionals do not have the time and skills to build recovery relationships with clients. That is the job of peer support. The evidence.
So this is kind of a dismissive claim that she is saying here, that licensed professionals don't have time to develop relationships. There's some truth to, maybe it takes longer time, but absolutely, absolutely that licensed professionals build relationships with their clients. It's a central part of their recovery. I build relationships with my patients all the time. Um, yeah, and to say that as a licensed professional, I don't do that, that I don't have time for that, that's very dismissive.
Shows that processing deep emotions and trauma related processes, and I'm going to take out this word deep. See, I got sucked into processing emotions and trauma related processes happens in relationships. They are within the mission of peer support. They do not require a license.
Okay, again, building relationships does not require a license, but doing therapy, doing trauma processing does require a license.
SAMHSA includes in its definition of the realm of peer support emotional, which means demonstrating empathy, caring, or concern to bolster self-esteem and confidence. We are doing what we are assigned to do by the U.S. federal government.
SAMHSA, which is a division of the federal government, sets model standards, but it does not and has not assigned any kind of authority to the ARC or any private group for that matter.
Contrary, so here's the claim. This is just astonishing. Dr. Ifland is not a licensed mental health professional. Neither are most advocates. Yet we are being trained to guide members through deep emotional and trauma-related processes that are typically reserved for licensed therapists. Facilitating trauma processing, unburdening, or transforming wounded parts is considered to be psychotherapy and should only be done by qualified clinicians. This just came from her head. But she's managed to scare the advocates off of doing this really valuable, powerful, simple, beautiful training. So contrary to this claim, deep emotional and trauma-related processes are explicitly described in the research literature as the mission of peer support.
Okay, trauma-informed services fall under peer support. Trauma-informed services fall under peer support, not trauma processing. Maybe Joan means trauma informed, but she keeps saying trauma processing. These are two different and distinct things.
Supporters are shown to spend approximately half their time in emotional support. The literature does not refer to a line between regular emotions and deep emotions, nor between regular trauma and deep trauma. Parts is a
Although those exact terms are not used in the SAMHSA guidelines, she wants you to focus on my use of the word deep instead of the real concerns that I brought up in my email. This is deflection.
Parts is a standard set of questions, and this is a really key point. Medical professionals use customized approaches, not a standard set of questions. Members set the pace, they're advised they can stop at any time, and permission is obtained.
Joan states because parts work as a standard set of questions, it's different from psychotherapy. But structure isn't the only factor that determines if something is within scope of practice or not. If the role is to guide someone through trauma processing, guide them through the questionnaires and trauma processing, that is psychotherapy, whether it's in a questionnaire form or not.
Here's another accusation, which we don't have any like aftercare. Oh, shoot. We're live 15 hours out of 300, out of every 24, 365 days a year.
Okay. Being live 15 days a year, 15 hours a day, which is not true, by the way. Really, Joan, you might want to update your website. Just saying. And also update what you're claiming here. Being live multiple hours a day doesn't equal having protocols for crisis and aftercare. Without referral systems, which there are none in the ARC, there is a lack of coverage here.
We have messenger groups and confidential Facebook groups. Advocates are extensively trained in emotional safety. SAMHSA's emotional, here is where safety comes from. SAMHSA's guidelines say safety competencies arise from respectful relationship development. That's safety.
Okay, there is so much more to safety than that. Safety requires policies, practices, protocols, referral systems for people that need help outside of the scope of practice of the ARC. Right, Joan? Right? Wouldn't you agree with that, Joan? That is, if you are acknowledging that peer support has a scope of practice. That's kind of been kind of the we're kind of going back and forth on that, aren't we? SAMHSA does say that relationships are foundational, but they also emphasize boundaries, scope of practice, and referral. When members become re-traumatized or dealing with trauma, you need to have safety protocols in place. You need to have referral systems in place, which the ARC does not have.
And to say that we are not safe, we're going far beyond the boundaries of safe processing.
Yes.
Safety is respectful relationship development. We're all over it.
It's so much more than that, Joan. And yes, I am saying that you are going far beyond the scope of practice boundaries and what is safe.
Here's a summary of the competencies. We cover them. We engage peers in collaborative and caring relationships, including reaching out to engage peers across the whole continuum of the recovery process. This is a key phrase, the whole continuum of the recovery process. Our job, a competency which we must have to meet federal guidelines, is to engage peers, including reaching out to engage peers across the whole continuum of the recovery process. It's our job, according to the federal government.
Joan is loving this whole continuum thing, this whole continuum. Okay, so whole continuum refers here by SAMHSA's guidelines, refers to the stages or phases of recovery. Stages or phases of recovery. Not, it does not at all refer to clinical interventions or emotional therapies. By highlighting the whole continuum, Joan is implying that the ARC has license to address all areas of recovery, which she equates with trauma processing, because she's mentioned it multiple times in this video, and doing emotional work. But in SAMHSA's actual guidance, what SAMHSA actually says means peers should connect with others in different stages of recovery. It does not authorize peers to take on clinical responsibilities like trauma processing. Joan is interpreting the whole continuum much more broadly than SAMHSA intended. That say you have a friend who's been diagnosed with cancer and you're going to walk with them through this period of their life. You're going to, be a support system for them. Maybe you're going to go to their doctor visits, their cancer treatment visits, um, prep food for them, help clean their home, do things of that nature, that you are being a support, an emotional support system for them. The whole continuum does not mean that you now become that your friend's oncologist, their radiologist, their dietitian. It doesn't mean you do those things. The whole continuum in the SAMHSA guidelines is that you are walking through them through the whole recovery process, the whole continuum of the recovery process, the different stages and phases of recovery. You don't become their clinician.
Competency number 2 is provide support. Number 3 shares lived experience of recovery, personalizes peer support, supports recovery planning, links to resources, services, and support, skills related to health, wellness, and recovery, helps peers to manage crises, values communication, supports collaboration and teamwork, promotes leadership and advocacy, promotes growth and development. I mean, isn't that incredible? Doesn't that sound like phase 1 training and phase 2?
Yes, SAMHSA lays out the 12 core competencies for peer support. These competencies assume proper boundaries, supervision, and referral when trauma issues exceed scope of practice. ARC has none of these safeguards.
This just, every time I go over this, I'm more incredulous. Like, how could this possibly have happened? How could somebody have written this down in an email and send it to our advocates? As laypersons, we are legally and ethically limited to providing peer support, encouragement, and general education. That's what this email says that we're allowed to do, encouragement and general education. Totally just doesn't have anything to do with the truth.
Yes, it does. Totally has everything to do with the truth. I wrote that as laypersons, we're ethically limited to provide encouragement, support, and general education. That's exactly how SAMHSA defines peer support. That's exactly how SAMHSA defines peer support. Through lived experiences, hope, encouragement, and resource sharing. The 12 competencies expand on those foundations, but they don't erase scope of practice. Meeting competencies does not mean peers can step into therapy roles. It means peers can do peer work safely with proper boundaries. Come on.
The reality, which is we're providing all of these competencies, we're covering all of them. And this is where this crosses the line into a threat. Now this email is threatening advocates. Training or encouraging advocates to do otherwise places you, the advocate, and the ARC at risk for ethical and potential legal consequences. I don't know. Sounds kind of, I'm not going to use the word that I was thinking of.
Okay, again, what I said, I will read that again. Training or encouraging advocates to do otherwise places you, the advocate, and the ARC at risk for ethical violations and potential legal consequences. That is not a threat. I am not threatening legal consequences. I'm informing the advocates of a risk that they are opening themselves up to, that they themselves are at risk of a legal action should they harm a member, re-traumatize or traumatize a member. They are opening themselves up to a liability lawsuit. That is not a threat. That is just a fact, and it's a caution. I'm just cautioning them. And advocates reading my email might feel concern, but that concern is legitimate because the risk and the liability is real. To just dismiss that is unresponsible.
You got to remember this is a marketing email. It starts out with a marketing banner.
Again, with the deflection instead of focusing on what the real concern is. She's just gonna deflect.
Okay. So if we walk away from what we're charged to do, what happens? This is damaging to the people in the ARC who need us, who need the full range of peer support. If we follow, if we crumble to the threats of this email, then we are walking away from our responsibilities as laid out in the SAMHSA guideline, and we are abandoning, to me, we're abandoning our members. We're not giving them everything that they need.
Raising scope of practice concerns is not abandoning the members, it's protecting them. Members are safest when advocates stay within those peer support boundaries and aren't being pushed into therapy-like exercises or practices.
And then there's just this random accusation that we are asking members not to use any other support. But gosh, if you look at the ROC spreadsheet, there are about 100 recommendations for outside support. If you look in the ARC Research Center, there are videos from the outside. And we also, of course, offer extensive training in how to use the outside. We have a whole video from the empowerment series on how to manage your medical providers. Okay.
Okay, so here's what I put in my email. This is the line from my email. Members are encouraged to rely exclusively on the ARC for healing. This can foster unhealthy dependency and discourage seeking outside help. I stand by this statement. What I'm pointing out here is the culture and practice within the ARC. So Joan points to the ROC spreadsheet for outside resources. But I just want to point out that that spreadsheet is behind $1,000 paywall. You would have to join the ROC, which is $1,000 to get access to those resources. And most of those resources are recommendations to YouTube videos, not referrals to professional providers or professional services. In my time as an advocate and director, I never saw Joan refer a member to therapy or to any outside resource, even when it was clearly beyond her expertise or her scope of practice. And I did witness this more than one occasion. In fact, I was told I couldn't say a member might need therapy. This is a conversation I had with Joan. And I was highly encouraged not to say that something was beyond my scope of practice. So while art technically has links to outside content, the culture and the practice sends a very different message. So I stand by my statement. Members are encouraged to rely primarily on the ARC and discouraged from seeking outside help. I stand by that 100%. To prove my point here, I'm just going to show this clip here of Joan in another meeting.
It's a big question. I think I remember from training that we're not supposed to tell someone they need to seek therapy. Am I remembering that correctly? You're absolutely right.
So There you go. That is Joan confirming to another advocate that she is absolutely right, that she is in training, that we are told not to refer people to outside sources or to therapy.
Here's a claim that we are supposed to be supervised by a licensed mental health professional. Washington State doesn't require any supervision at all.
Wants to throw that in there. The Washington State doesn't require any supervision at all, and that is because if you are peer support, you are not supervision is not required. However, once you cross that boundary, cross over, step outside of your scope of practice, now you do require supervision.
About Sheila's licensure. So here she is accusing Sheila of not holding a clinical license in counseling, psychology, social work, or psychiatry, and is therefore not qualified to supervise or guide trauma work or clinical interventions. Now, this accusation falls into a whole category of its own. It's defamation.
It's not defamation. Either Joan is confused about what defamation is, or she is trying to confuse her audience. Defamation requires a false statement of fact. Stating a truth that you do not like is not defamation. What I stated was fact. Therefore, not defamation.
Here are Sheila's credentials. Ms. Gravely provided pastoral counseling services for over 25 years under the exemption outlined in Virginia Code 54.1-3401, which explicitly permits ministers and clergy to perform counseling within the scope of their ministerial duties. In 2019, Ms. Gravely retired from pastoral ministry and began working as a master certified life coach and certified natural health professional, providing non-clinical educational support in the field of recovery. In 2023, she also obtained certification as Food Addiction Recovery Advocate, FARA. She no longer represents herself as a licensed therapist, nor does she practice under any.
She doesn't represent herself as a licensed therapist because she never held a license. So that right there, that statement that Joan says that she does no longer, that implies that she once had a license, which she never did. She has never, ever had a license to practice therapy.
Clinical license within IRC or elsewhere. Sheila's note, I counseled under the state's exemption rather than counseling under the licensed therapist statute because my employer required it for two reasons. One, as pastoral counselors, we and our clients are protected from being subpoenaed by the legal system to protect client confidentiality. And two, we were not obligated to follow the law with regard to anything that goes against our religious beliefs. We were still mandatory reporters as our licensed therapists. In my capacity as the director of counseling, not only was Sheila a counselor, she was a high-level counselor.
No such thing as a high-level counselor. She may have had a high position within her with her employer, but high-level counselor, not a thing.
I was responsible for overseeing the internships of pastoral and counseling candidates from several seminaries, the training of peer counselors for groups, including Mending the Soul, an international group for survivors of abuse, Grief Share, a group for people who have suffered loss of loved ones through death, Divorce Care, a group for people processing through divorce, and Single and Parenting, a group for people who are single parents. In these capacities, I developed curricula, taught classes, observed counseling sessions, and gave feedback, interfaced with the various seminaries to coordinate the internships. In addition to this, I provided management for all of our staff counselors, peer counselors, and support group facilitators. Let's go back to what the email says. She's not qualified to supervise or guide trauma work or clinical interventions. How divorced from reality can you get? This is, I don't know. I don't have a word for it.
Okay, instead of addressing the substance of my concerns, we're just going to say, how divorced from reality is she? I expect way better from Joan. I expect better from Joan, but I'm not surprised at this point. I'm not surprised. When someone doesn't have real proof to back up their claims, they often result to insults. Joan dismisses it by attacking my mental status and questioning my grip on reality. Does that sound like something you would expect from someone of Joan's education? A personal attack, a personal, oh, actually, you know what? I- Now that I say that, it is because being a member of the ARC and being an advocate and attending advocate meetings and directors meetings, I often heard Joan personally attack other people who weren't there to defend themselves, which is what she did here. This is actually very classic Joan to do. Um, but I'm just going to say, I expect better from you, Joan. I expect better from Joan. But when someone doesn't have real proof to back up their claim, they often do resort to insults. And that's exactly what has happened here. Instead of evidence, she wants to question my grip on reality.
Okay. Now we're going into what is peer support. SAMHSA states that peer support core competencies, principles, and values include trauma-informed. Peer recovery support utilizes a strengths-based framework that emphasizes physical, psychological, and emotional safety, which we know the safety comes in relationship building, and creates opportunities for survivors to rebuild a sense of control and empowerment. That's what we're doing. We're rebuilding a sense of control and empowerment, which we do really well. And again, here's that quote. We are charged with reaching out to engage peers across the whole continuum. We're not going to let them down in any arena.
Okay. What's with the crocodile tears? I'm so actually, you know what? It's nice that we made it all the way through this video with her just now starting the crocodile tears. This is something that she does some often inside the art community to elicit sympathy. Victim. She's the victim, um, and yeah.
We're powerful, we're courageous, we're smart, we're safe, and we're following federal guidelines when we do this. We are going to meet them across the whole continuum of the recovery process. SAMHSA goes so far as to include peer support in its overall definition of a trauma-informed approach. Peer support and mutual self-help are key as vehicles for establishing safety and hope, building trust, enhancing collaboration, and utilizing their lived experience to promote recovery and healing. And here's what this email claims what peer support should not be: guiding others through trauma processing or deep psychological interventions. We just see SAMHSA says this is your job, and then this email says, nope, you're not supposed to be doing this.
Totally wrong, Joan. That is not what SAMHSA says. SAMHSA is clear that peer support complements, not replaces, licensed therapy. They are very clear on this. The fact that peer support is trauma informed doesn't erase scope boundaries and doesn't trauma informed is not the same as trauma processing, which you keep trying to say that it is. It is not. What the ARC is teaching through parts work crosses that line into therapy, and no amount of selective quoting changes that. And no matter how many times Jones says it does not. Hear me again. No amount of selective quoting, and no matter how many times Jones says it does not equate trauma informed to trauma processing. Not the same.
Making clinical judgments or providing therapy, we don't do that. Promising or claiming the ability to heal or transform trauma or mental health conditions, We don't make claims. The ARC is the best place for people to come and heal from. All right, it's going to sound over the top, from anything.
Sure sounds like a claim to me, Joan.
All right. Then we come to this incredible thing she does. It is totally illegal to turn around, leave a company, and go back and recruit the employees.
I'm not recruiting anybody. I just want to be clear of that. I do not have a business. I'm not running a business. And so there is no recruiting happening. I'm just offering peer support, free peer support for people who have been traumatized, who have experienced trauma within the ARC.
She says, if you've had similar concerns, you're not alone. If you'd like to discuss this further or need resources on ethical peer support, this is a bit ironic. I wonder what her resources on ethical peer support are.
Well, Joan, it's SAMHSA, just like you.
We just work from research. And I hope everybody who listens to this says, thank goodness we do.
I want to encourage everyone to do their own research. Again, don't take my word for it. Don't take Joan's word for it. You need to do your own research. I encourage you to look directly at SAMHSA's guidelines, the peer support competencies and the trauma-informed principles. When you do, you'll see that Joan has been cherry picking and stretching the evidence to fit her practices, the parts work practices. If you like how finding solid resources on ethical peer support, again, I'm going to say this again, which I find it because obviously Joan thought this was very funny, and so maybe she'll get a good laugh out of this. If you'd like help finding solid resources on ethical peer support, I'm happy to point you in the right direction. The best safeguard is for all of us to be informed, not just told what to think. In closing, I want to point out something important. As someone who calls herself a researcher, Joan should know better than to cherry pick evidence in order to give false comfort to advocates. That is not research, it's spin. It's twisting, it's manipulation. An ethical researcher presents the full body of evidence, not just the pieces that fit their narrative, so that others can make an informed decision. Hiding or twisting key parts of federal guidelines doesn't protect advocates or members. It misleads them. True safety and empowerment comes from transparency, honesty, and the ability to weigh all the facts, not from selective quotations designed to prop up a shaky practice. So I leave you with that. Again, if you have any questions or concerns or just want some guidance on where to go next, on how to get this information for yourself, if you want, you can reach out to me. I'm happy to have a conversation with you. And when you have all the information, you are more empowered because you have now the power to make an informed decision that is right for you. If you found this video helpful or informative, let me know what your thoughts are. Drop it in the comments or send me a message. I'd love to hear from you. Until then, take care of yourself. Have a great day.